Hey guys, it's Chandler Vincent with weldermade.com. Thanks for joining us today. We are working on the stainless steel project for the month of March. Go ahead and check the bottom right hand corner of your blueprint and double check, make sure that part number matches mine, and we'll get started. So step one is checking out the blueprint, understanding all the different parts, making sure we know we have the right amount of parts and that we understand what parts go where. We're looking up in the right hand corner of the blueprint. There's these bubbles that reference each part, and it has a number and it also has a 1x or a 2x underneath it, and that means that there is one or two of those parts. That's the quantity. So we're going to start with part number one. There's only one. It's got two radius corners. It is a 5x6, and that is our base plate. So we've got that. And two is these little triangle pieces. There's two of those. We've got those. And then number three is a side piece that is 3x5. We've got one of those. And then we have part number four, which is these triangle pieces. There's two of them. They're these more long oblong triangles. They're a lot longer than parts two. And then we have part number five. That's these rectangles that are 2x5. There's two of those. We've got those. And then we've got part six. That is the piece on the top. That's another one of these 3x5 rectangles. So then we've got part seven. Part seven is these two small rectangles that are 3 inches by 2.5. There's two of those. That goes on the back of the project. And then we got part eight. That's got the hole in the middle of them, and that is 5x2. Okay, and then we've got part number nine. That's the big rectangle that's a 3x5, but it has the logo in it. So it looks like parts 9, 6, and 3 are all the same size. They're all the same. The only thing different is number 9 has a logo in it. 6 and 3 are the same size part. They're just in two different locations, so we went ahead and gave them two different numbers to make it a little less complicated on you guys. So you guys should have a total of 13 parts. I'm going to go ahead and count mine, make sure I have everything I need. Okay, I've got 13. So now it's time to go into step number two, and that is part preparation. The most important thing about part preparation is getting the dross off the back side. All that is oxidized material, and it's not good for the weld pool. It makes it really turbulent, and it makes it inconsistent, and it makes it really hard to learn if you don't get that dross off. So we want to make sure we get that dross off, and then after I do that, I'm going to rub it down with a cleaning chemical, make sure all the surface grease and any surface contaminants are removed from the material. Okay, now that I've cleaned the dross off the backside, I'm going to grab my flapper wheel and my die grinder. There's a couple little points on every single part. That's where our laser didn't quite cut through the whole part. That way all the parts don't come flying off the laser after they're cut. And that can prevent these parts from actually getting perfectly put together in a nice tight fit on those butt joints. And so I'm just gonna go get my grinder and knock those little tits off real quick. Okay guys, now that our parts are clean, we are ready to start step 3, and that is the tacking up process. So we're going to start with all the parts that are on the same plane, like parts 9 and 2, and the set of 4, and the set of part 7. We're going to get all those tacked up. Anything on the same plane, we want to get tacked up on a nice flat surface, and then we'll transfer over to the easy tack. but we'll start tacking up the rest of the assembly. Just quick little fusion tacks, don't need to be too much. Now we're grabbing one of our plain rectangles, part number 3. That's a 3x5. Okay, now we are going to do our 2 number 4s. These really long triangles. Try not to melt those corners away too far. The more nice sharp edges and more crisp corners you have, the easier it is to line all the parts up together in the final assembly. Okay, now for part 7. Okay, that is everything that's on the same plane, so I'm going to go ahead and clamp the easy tack to the table and we'll get started. Well, I want to start with our part number 5, the 2 pieces to the little triangles. We're going to tack up that assembly first. So I'm going to take our 2 number 5s, transfer them over to the easy tack. If those parts are put together properly and the edges are touching, they should just fuse right together. If the corners start melting away from each other, don't panic, just go ahead and add some filler wire and close up that weld hole and get it tacked together. Okay, now I'm going to rotate it over and tack part number 3 onto the other side of our set of number 4s. To make sure all of our draw sides facing to the inside of the project. We can go ahead and tack part number 8 to the set of number 7s. Okay, now we have that whole assembly tacked together. I'm going to tack it onto the back of our assembly, mating part number 3 to both of our 7s and 8. Okay, I'm going to rotate it one more time. Okay, now we have that whole assembly put together. We can go ahead and put part 6 and our assembly of part number 5 onto the triangles. I'm going to lay it down just like that. I'm going to tack the very tip of that triangle first on both sides, and then I'm going to reach my hand on the inside of the project and just pull everything together, make sure everything's nice and tight. Those corners started to melt away from each other a little bit, so I'm just going to add a little bit of filler wire and close up that hole. That tack turned out pretty great, so I'm going to brush it while it's still warm, get all that oxide layer off. Okay, now we have almost our whole box. We're just missing the top piece, which is part number 6. It is a 3x5 rectangle. We're going to set that right on top. I like to tack the base plate very last, that way I can reach my hand in and push any of these pieces out that I need to make flush or line up. Okay, that is our whole assembly. Now we just got to get it onto our base plate. It looks like we are going to be having a corner joint that is going to be welded in the overhead position on the back of the project, which is the 2 number 7s and the number 1. So the most important thing is getting that corner joint to line up, and then just make sure your project is centered side to side on the base plate. It looks like it should be about a 0.422. Sorry guys, that's a terrible measurement. If you have a pair of calipers, just set it to 0.42. If you're just using a tape measure, you just make sure your project is nice and centered on the plate. Sorry for that terrible dimension. That's just kind of how the project turned out to be. So the videos that we are producing right now or to help our subscribers that subscribe to weldermade.com that gets one of these kits every month. So right now, these videos are just to help you get this project tacked up and give you some general guidance on getting it cleaned, tacked up, and help you figure out the weld sequencing. Later on, we're going to start adding more footage to our YouTube channel that will go more in depth with like our torch setup, what you should be looking at in the weld pool, what it means to have a turbulent weld pool, and we'll go into the science of these projects. But these kind of videos are just to help our subscribers get their projects tacked up. We'll go in more depth later on in our Chalk Talk videos. Okay, we are all tacked up. I'm going to go ahead and brush all my tacks and get those oxidized layers. Anything that's discolored in any way, go ahead and brush it until you get back to the natural stainless color. To keep some of these butt joints from warping when I'm welding, I'm going to go ahead and just do a couple fusion tacks along the butt joint, and that's going to help the temperature of the project be the same. It's going to let heat transfer through all the parts easier, and it's going to keep them from warping. Okay guys, we are all tacked up. Now it is time to move to step number 4. That is the welding process. So when you go to weld these projects, just try to think a little bit about weld sequencing. And when I say weld sequencing, that is basically what weld should you weld first, which weld should you weld last. And there's a couple things we're looking at when you're choosing a weld sequence. One is what welds are heat sensitive, and 2, how can you sequence your welds to where you have other welds covering the stops and starts of other welds. So for us to do that, we're going to weld these butt joints on the front and the back of the project first, and then we're going to do all of our vertical corner joints, and then we're going to go ahead and do all of the joints through the middle of the project, like this outside corner and this skewed fillet weld here on the top and the side of parts number 5. And then we can do the welds down and up the sides, which will then tie in all of those welds and make it look like one continuous weld bead. We want to try to hide as many stops and starts as possible and try to limit the amount of craters on this project. When welding this, try to focus on consistency, fillet weld size, full radius contour on your corner joints, and just being consistent, and make sure you learn something with this project. If you are getting uncomfortable when welding a weld, go ahead and stop, learn from it, reposition yourself, learn where you're more comfortable, then finish the weld. I don't want you guys to be wasting any of this valuable hood time on these projects. Learn everything you can from this project, and that's all I got for you on tips on welding. I'm going to go ahead and start welding this project up because I can't wait any longer. I'm going to go ahead and start with welding parts number 4 together, and then we're going to bounce to the back of the project and weld parts number 7 together. I am not putting a purge on this project. You're welcome to put a purge on it at home if you'd like. It will help you by cooling the inside of the project and keeping the backside from sugaring. That is a term we use when the backside of the weld is oxidizing on the inside of the project. I'm going to try not to penetrate a ton on this project, just because I don't have a purge. But that's why we have this hole right here on every project, so you can put a purge hose in, tape it across, and make sure you can get a good purge in there. Now that I'm finished with the weld, I'm going to keep my gas on my post flow flowing at the end of that weld joint, letting that stainless cool while being shielded by the argon. So that didn't turn out too bad. I started to get uncomfortable there towards the middle. All I did is lowered my amperage, kept the shielding gas on the weld, adjusted, and kept going. Make sure you're comfortable. Okay, now we are welding parts number 7 together, that vertical butt joint. And we're going to weld that vertical corner. I'll snip my end. So now I'm going to weld this horizontal butt joint so I can weld these vertical corners. Okay, while those are hot, I know I'm going to have to weld over that oxidized layer on those corners, so I'm going to hurry and brush those. Okay, I'm going to let that side cool off a little bit. I'm going to bounce around and weld that joint under parts 5, that overhead skewed fillet. I'm going to get on my knees to make sure I can visually see up and under that cross member. Okay, now that all of our vertical corners are welded, I'm going to go ahead and weld the tip of our 2 number 5s together at the tip of the triangle. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and weld these vertical butt joints. I'm going to continue this weld from this vertical corner and just wrap it around and finish that butt joint. Okay, now I'm going to weld this top corner. It's kind of a skewed fillet of parts 5 and 6 coming together. Okay, now I'm going to weld that outside corner, joining parts 3 and 6 together. Okay, now that all those are welded, we can start by welding the bottom side of part number 2 and wrapping it up and around that triangle and stopping right where 5 and 6 come together. And then we'll start from the other direction on this outside corner and then work our way in and have a stop start right in the middle. Okay, just got our 2 outside corner joints at the top of part 6 to go. I'm going to hurry and brush some of the oxidized areas from the previous welds. Okay, now all we got is the fillet weld around the base and the overhead corner joint. Thank you for being with us. We're excited to see you next month. If there's something that you see we can improve on, go ahead and comment below. We will start our Chalk Talk videos here really soon, where we will go in depth on a lot of the welding techniques and the weld settings and the torch setups and all that. Right now, with these videos, we're just trying to make sure you guys are getting these projects tacked up and cleaned properly, and make sure that we are starting to think about weld sequencing when welding these projects. And we appreciate you guys being here. We will see you next month.